Hi, I'm Toby Smith, Vice President for Policy at the Association of American Universities and co-chair of Engaging Scientists and Engineers in Policy, and a member of the governing board of the Journal of Science, Policy, and Governance.
And I'm Erin Heath, Director of Federal Relations at AAAS. I also co-chair with Toby the ESEP Coalition and chair the JSPG Governing Board. We're excited to introduce this video feature produced by the Journal of Science, Policy, and Governance and AAAS in recognition of our joint call for papers focused on the 75-year anniversary of Vannevar Bush's Science, the Endless Frontier, generously supported by the Kavli Foundation. This call for papers invites students, postdocs, policy fellows, early career researchers, and young professionals of all academic disciplines to share their ideas for how we can build on the Endless Frontier framework and shape the future of American science and science policy.
A few words about why this is an important time for young people to speak up and make their voices heard on science policy. The report that Erin referenced by Vannevar Bush was written 75 years ago. It's time to really look and reassess what science policy should look like for the next 75 years. And to do that, we need the next generation of scientists and those who are looking at science policy to be engaged.
To help authors with their writing, JSPG and AAAS have organized a number of free webinars featuring many thought leaders from our organizations and beyond, covering topics as diverse as catalyzing public engagement in science, maximizing the economic and societal impacts of R&D investments, and optimizing U.S. science policy to respond to public health challenges. Learn more at the URL below.
This video will elevate voices of early career researchers and professionals in science policy, many of which are in attendance this week, as they share their hopes and dreams for the future of American science and science policy.
We'll then hear from AAAS CEO Sudip Parikh, National Academy of Sciences President Marcia McNutt, and former White House OSTP and NSF Director Neal Lane, interviewed by JSPG CEO Shalin Jyotishi and Chief Outreach Officer Adriana Bankston. Doctors Parikh, McNutt, and Lane will share their ideas for where young people could focus their efforts, in addition to a few kernels of wisdom for shaping science policy.
The deadline to submit for JSPG and AAAS's call for papers is April 4th, 2021. Visit the URL below to see the full details. Top papers will be awarded cash prizes. There'll also be outreach funds available to help authors turn their ideas into action. So as you go through the video, engage online with other AAAS meeting attendees and tag your takeaways and thoughts using the handles and hashtags below.
On behalf of JSPG and AAAS, we hope you enjoy this video.
I dream of a future of American science policy.
We dream of a future of American science policy.
I dream of a future of American science policy that prioritizes the protection of sacred sites and the preservation and protection of our water and land.
That prioritizes fighting racism, patriarchy, and oppressive societal norms.
That prioritizes the human impacts of scientific progress, the well-being of diverse communities, and the health and future of our planet.
That prioritizes responsible innovation, that leads through service to others, and empowers the next generation of researchers to reimagine the future of what's possible.
A global scientific enterprise that enables discoveries for the common good and is inclusive of researchers from all countries and backgrounds.
One that incorporates the next generation of scientists and engineers, because we bring innovative and collaborative new perspectives that will shape the future of our field.
So science is open, accessible, and inclusive for everyone.
Students and early career researchers should have a role in shaping science policy because you have a unique and transformative perspective, not on how science has always been done, but on what science can be.
I believe students and early career researchers should have a role in shaping science policy because the hours spent conducting research not only reflects their perseverance for the truth, but also their unparalleled scientific domain knowledge, which has the potential to inform the political landscape for the benefit of all.
I'm looking forward to a future of science policy engagement at the state and local level, where communities can be directly impacted by evidence-based policies and practices.
I dream of a future of American science policy that prioritizes equity over all else. While science is capable of amazing things like the creation of a safe and effective COVID-19 vaccine in under a year, it has also been evoked as a way to commit atrocities and disproportionately dehumanize Black and Brown people. Scientific research and discovery in the U.S. has never been apolitical and has never been equitable. I'm hopeful, though, that this could change. We must decolonize science, rejecting the notion that it is somehow divorced from policy and politics. We must ensure anti-racism is the backbone of STEM education, research funding, and public outreach in the US and worldwide.
Students and early career researchers play an essential role in shaping science policy.
We are the future leaders that will leverage science and policy to improve the world
and build a more equitable society and sustainable planet through collaboration and innovation.
NSPN sends good luck to all the authors of the JSPG AAAS Endless Frontiers Writing Competition.
So good luck to the authors.
So I'm sending the best of luck to the authors.
I wish the authors of the JSPG AAAS Endless Frontier Writing Competition the best of luck.
We cannot wait to see the visions you have for shaping the future of American science and science policy.
Best of luck to all the authors.
Looking forward to reading all your submissions.
We can't wait to see your biggest, boldest, and most forward-thinking ideas for reimagining the scientific and research enterprise, catalyzing disruptive and inclusive innovation, and shaping science and technology policy in the years to come.
Folks, we heard from early career scientists and engineers and policy professionals from all academic disciplines and walks of life on what they hope will constitute the future of U.S. science and science policy.
JSPG and AAAS's joint call for papers is focused on looking back on Vannevar Bush's Endless Frontier framework and how American science rose to prominence. But we also need to look to the future in order to address the urgent and most important challenges of society today.
From a greater focus on maximizing the economic and societal impacts of research to fostering true diversity, equity, and inclusion in STEM, there are many ways we can expand and strengthen American science and science policy.
In the next segment, join Shalin and I as we interview members of JSPG's advisory board and other leaders in science policy to gather advice on where authors can focus their writing efforts. These leaders will also share some kernels of wisdom for how early career leaders can be effective in impacting US science policy.
As Toby and Erin shared in their intro, tweet your takeaways to us using the handles and hashtags below, so we can learn and hear from you during the AAAS meeting and beyond. The most prolific and most profound tweeters will be invited to contribute to the cover memo for this joint issue. Thank you for tuning in. Sudip, thanks so much for taking the time to interview with us today. We're really honored to have you. Sudip Parikh is CEO of the American Association for the Advancement of Science and the executive publisher of the Science family of journals. Sudip has spent 2 decades at the nexus of science, policy, and business, and we're really pleased to be partnering with AAAS and the Kavli Foundation for this call for papers focused on the 75-year anniversary of Vannevar Bush's Endless Frontiers. Dr. Parikh's bio is available at AAAS.org, and he is on Twitter at Sudip S. Parikh. Sudip, thanks so much for joining us. We're honored to have you.
Shalin, thanks so much for the invitation. I'm excited to do this.
Absolutely. So Sudip, JSPG and AAAS, our joint call for papers really focuses on reflecting back on Vannevar Bush's Endless Frontier, getting that historical context, but also thinking about the urgent, important science policy challenges that we're faced with today. With your vantage point at AAAS, what's top of mind for you? What should early career researchers consider writing about for this call for papers?
Well, I'm so glad that we're participating in this as AAAS because, frankly, we need voices that are different than the ones that have been talking about this stuff for 25 years. And so this is, when I think of what's on top of mind for me, I hope that it aligns with what's top of mind for you. If it doesn't, say that, because frankly, there are a lot of folks here in Washington who've been talking about this stuff for a long time, and we get set in our ways. So I'm going to tell you my 2 or 3 things are at the top, but I'd love to hear from you all, from the audience listening to this. Do you think that's true? Do you think it's right? You can disagree with me. So first is the difference between now and right after World War II is immense, right? So many things have happened. But what's top of mind for me is the human capital going into the sciences. Because we are at this place where many nations are joining the United States at the forefront of scientific research. And that's a good thing. That's a good thing. We want others doing great science. But what it means is it's a competitive landscape. And we as a nation need to be pulling in people from all across the country, geographically, from every race and ethnicity. We want every gender at the table. And this is, if you look at the data, we're not doing well at this. We're doing terrible at it. And it is going to hold us back, because in sheer numbers, we're never going to compete in terms of the number of scientists and number of engineers. But when you get the creative boost, the innovation boost that comes from a diverse team, that comes from diverse thought that is derived from diverse experience, that is incredibly powerful. It gives you orthogonal solutions that are unexpected. And so I think if we don't maximize that, if we don't figure out the ways to do that, we're really hurting ourselves as a nation. And frankly, we're hurting the world, because the United States needs to be a leader at the forefront of science. So that is top of mind, absolutely top of mind. And so if the community that's listening to this, we need some new ideas, okay? Because it's not like this is a new problem. The programmatic aspect of AAAS was born out of this exact same question in 1970. And so that's why we have the programmatic part of AAAS. We haven't done that well. I mean, we're better off than we were in 1970, but we have a long way to go. And so I think anything that addresses that challenge, and that means, how do we retain scientists that are from diverse backgrounds? How do we, recruitment is one thing, retention is a whole other subject. How do we ensure that we maintain scientific excellence, but that we broaden the aperture of what's important in science? So that is absolutely top of mind. Second for me, and I know I'm answering this in a long answer for you, Shalin, so I'll cut it short, is to make sure that the support for science in the country remains strong. And that means trusted bonds between the scientific community and the people that support us. And the people that support us are the American citizens who are paying taxes and expect something for that investment. And so we can't be completely disconnected from the needs of our communities. And so, whereas in the after 1945, we went down this route of talking about government investment in basic research. We need to do that, but now there's a huge number of partnerships that are possible. When I think about the government, I think about philanthropy, I think about industry. There is an environment out there that did not exist in the 1940s, and so how do we coordinate that effort so that we can solve the big challenges of our time? Climate change, food and water insecurity, public health. We've got to make sure that we are building a national strategy that's not just thinking about the government, but that's thinking about the government, these philanthropies, the industry, and then our people, our diverse people. So two big problems. But again, I'd love to hear from you all. Does that comport with what you're thinking?
Really sound advice there. Sudip, are there any reports, books, papers, just general resources from AAAS or elsewhere that you recommend early career researchers brush up on as they're framing their writing topics and preparing their submissions?
Yeah, from AAAS, look, if you're not following Matt Hurahan and his analyses of the federal investment in science, you're missing out. Matt he's not just giving the numbers, okay? He's thinking through trend analysis. He's thinking through comparisons to other countries. He's thinking through funding models. So go to the AAAS website, go to the government relations page, and you'll find the budget analyses tools that Matt Hurahan does. Follow him on Twitter. It's worth your time. I'd also encourage you to beyond AAAS, look to some of the other organizations here in town in DC. So here, I'm going to take you outside of just the societies. The scientific societies have done a lot of great work. Any of them have good resources. Let me take you to some things that are outside of that. The Council on Competitiveness. This is a a group that has a lot of business members, has some nonprofits, a lot of university members. They have put together some terrific reports that are broad beyond just scientific investment, but also policy around both tax policy and also intellectual property. You may not agree with it all, but you need to go out there and look. Look at what's on BIO's webpage, because they're also thinking in terms of some of their work on diversity is actually really good, really thoughtful. And so let's make sure that you're looking at all these possible sources of information, because even if you may not agree with even the majority of what they might be proposing, there are pieces. There's a lot of wisdom across the spectrum here in DC. Find the pieces that work, and then create your own sort of thought process, because it's very easy to get stuck in these molds of, yes, I sit over here on the political spectrum, so this is the menu of choices that I have. Don't think of it that way. What we need is fresh thinking. That's the reason for this collaboration, is looking for that fresh thinking. So that often requires pulling from elsewhere and turning things in a different way, so that they can get the outcome that you want, and maybe even pull some additional people along with you in terms of supporting it.
Absolutely. That's great advice, just tying into the industry lens, and then also, putting yourself out of your comfort zone and thinking outside of the box. So to span out a little bit, part of JSPG's mission is also to nurture and elevate early career voices and to help them by way of training and professional development. What's a piece of advice that you got when you were first starting out that you might share with others who are looking to build a career in science policy, or even just contribute as a practicing scientist or engineer?
Every policy discussion is about a slippery slope. Every one of them. And everyone will make the slippery slope argument about you shouldn't change because it's a slippery slope and you'll break something. The older I get, the more I realize you got to try, because all policy is a slippery slope. And if you break something, you fix it. And so be willing to take a chance, specifically with making a policy recommendation. I mean, how is that? What's the risk other than not having it implemented?
Sudip, I know we're out of time. Any parting advice for our audience out there looking to reflect on Endless Frontier and think about the future of American science and American science policy?
Here's what I'll say is that I have been, anytime I'm asked about what makes me optimistic, I say that I look at the participation of scientists who are at the beginnings of their career right now in policy debates, in engaging with the public. And I see this incredible energy that is out there. And don't lose that. We are in a tumultuous time. We're at a time that of these. Whenever you have these periods of uncertainty, it's an opportunity for an inflection, and it can go either way. It can go either way, and you all have that energy. Don't lose it. Focus it on actually trying to put good policy prescriptions together for the nation and for the world. Do it in a way that is not arrogant, but that is confident, not strident, but that is seeking to make sure you're transmitting the truth. And if you can do that, and it's a fine line to walk, and we need, like I said, we need 100,000 of you to actually do this. I think we're going to look back on this period and say this was the beginning of something good.
Brilliant parting words. Sudip, thanks so much again for taking the time to interview with us. Sudip Parikh is CEO of the American Association for the Advancement of Science and the executive publisher of the Science family of journals. He is on Twitter at Sudip S. Parikh. Thanks again so much.
Thank you, Shalin. Enjoyed it.
Today, I'm honored to be speaking with Dr. Marcia McNutt, President of the U.S. National Academy of Sciences. From 2013 to 2016, Marcia served as editor-in-chief of the Science family of journals, and prior to joining Science, she served as the 15th director of the U.S. Geological Survey. Marcia is also a member of the JSPG Advisory Board. Thank you so much for joining. So I'm especially excited to talk to you today. I'm a scientist myself, currently working in science policy and advocacy for research and higher education and topics related to the STEM workforce. So I'm really interested to hear about your some of the topics that we'll discuss today. To frame this a little bit around JSPG, so I'm currently the Chief Outreach Officer and have been involved in organizing events for our issues. And a lot of our recent efforts have focused around the 75th anniversary of Vannevar Bush's Science the Endless Frontier. So just looking at how we might reimagine the future of science and science policy. So with that framing, I wanted to ask you a little bit about the system of incentives and rewards in academia, which I think affects a lot of the culture in our universities. So I'm wondering if you could comment on this topic from your current role as president of the National Academies of Sciences. In a panel, I think that you were on in 2019 related to the culture of science, you mentioned that good scientific practices and open access should be rewarded for career advancement in academia. And however, I think we're still pretty far from some of this. And how do you think we can change the system of incentives and rewards to really move the needle in institutions?
At my own institution, the National Academy of Sciences, we are now discouraging taking gifts for new awards that simply pat researchers on the back for the same kinds of activities that are furthering the status quo. And instead, we are looking for ways to reward people for activities that actually matter. So one we're working on right now is a new prize that will reward researchers who are involved in communication of science, because we think this is something else that has previously not been considered something that is part of the typical reward system in science, and yet basically it's all part of building trust in what we do.
Mm-hmm. So another question related to publishing, which of course publishing is critical to advancing research. And I also think the publishing system has changed over time and needs to evolve with some of the current open access and preprints. So as from your perspective as having been editor-in-chief of the Science family of journals, how do you see journals coexisting with opportunities such as open access, preprints, and how does this sort of help the careers of young researchers? That will sort of be the first part. And then how can we, as we're discussing communications, how can we make this more digestible for the public as well?
I view publishing, from the standpoint of being a geoscientist, that it is actually an ecosystem. And we know from the science of ecosystems that they are strongest and most resilient when they are diverse. And the advent of open access publishing and the rise of preprints has actually added to the diversity of the publishing landscape. And I believe it's made it actually much stronger and much more resilient. It used to be, back when I started in research, many, many years ago, the community was much smaller. I could get the benefits of what people get today from a preprint server just by sending my paper around. I knew the people in the field who were going to be interested in it. But now science is so much larger, it's so much more international, it's so much more big business. You can't do that anymore. And so preprint servers have stepped in to fill that. They are not, in my view, ever going to entirely replace journals.
Right. So now to turn to another aspect in relation to thinking about science and the pandemic. So it was interesting to learn about your role as director of the U.S. Geological Survey. And I know that you previously drew this parallel between the Deepwater Horizon explosion and today's pandemic. And as you noted, as both events enlist both science and technology to solve a crisis, but there is still a high level of skepticism in science on the part of the public. So how do you think that we can restore public trust in science and engage the public in addressing the pandemic?
So this is an interesting question because while frequent surveys have shown that there can be public skepticism on some of the more partisan issues in science, like climate change, or nuclear energy, or GMOs. They repeatedly show that there is broad bipartisan support when it comes to public health. And therefore, to see an issue like the pandemic become polarized is really quite remarkable, and in my view, almost unprecedented.
So with this administration and moving forward, how do we ensure that science is really front and center in policymaking and educating leaders to really make decisions based on evidence?
And so it's again, one of these issues that if the leaders on down are saying science is important and we're going to use it in our decision making, I'm extremely hopeful that that's indeed what's going to happen. But then the onus really comes back to us as scientists to say a couple things. First of all, how do we create actionable science for these decision makers? How do we make sure that our science is decision ready for them? Because most of the science that we publish in our journals, in our preprints, is useless to them. This isn't actionable science. It's not decision ready. And we have to, first of all, train, cultivate, and reward a whole group of scientists who are those translators who make the science decision ready. But also we have to think ourselves while we're doing our research, what are the policy implications and how can we communicate them whenever needed? And then secondly, in addition to making the science decision ready and actionable, I think we have to think strategically as well.
Thank you for that. There's a lot more we could discuss on this, but I want to just make sure we touch up on the workforce question before we end. So, because I think it's really critical to think about how we train the next generation of scientists in our institutions, especially now, as you mentioned, with a new administration that would support science. And you also mentioned diversity. So obviously, currently, early career researchers from certain backgrounds are still disadvantaged from entering or remaining in the research pipeline. So how do you think that we can stimulate those who are traditionally marginalized in science to continue making breakthroughs and provide them with opportunities to do so?
Well, first of all, we know that there are some outstanding examples of scientists from underrepresented communities that are contributing to science. And they are fabulous role models. And we already know that climate change is disproportionately affecting communities of color. We know the same with the pandemic. And there are many other things too. And so I think we need to do a better job of showing that science is interested in addressing those problems and supporting them to address those problems.
Great. So I know we're out of time. I just want to thank you so much for your time today. That was really insightful. I wish we could discuss more, but this was really great for us as well. And hopefully you enjoyed the discussion.
I did very much. And thank you so much for inviting me.
Today, we're very honored to be speaking with Dr. Neal Lane, who is a senior fellow in Science and Technology Policy at Rice University's Baker Institute for Public Policy. Of his many achievements, Neal has served as director of the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy and science advisor to President Bill Clinton, as well as director of the National Science Foundation, making him one of only 2 individuals to hold both appointments. We're also very honored to have Neal as a member of the JSPG Advisory Board. Dr. Lane's bio is available at sciencepolicyjournal.org/advisory board, and the Baker Institute is on Twitter at Baker Institute. Neal, thank you so much for joining us. We're honored to have you.
Thank you very much, Shalin. Very pleased to be here.
Neal, JSPG and AAAS's call for papers is really focused on reflecting back on Endless Frontier and understanding the historical context, but also looking forward and engaging students and early career researchers to think about how we can push the envelope and shape a better future of American science and science policy. You've been one of only 2 people to serve as both head of NSF and OSTP. What's top of mind for you right now? If you had to recommend a focus, what are some of the most critical science policy challenges that young people should be focused on for their writing?
Well, of course, the list is long. It's one sits down to think about what these challenges really are. Serious social issues. I mean, we still have racism in the country. We still have discrimination that results in bias, that results in inadequate opportunities, unfair experiences for people of a different color or gender or transgender. I mean, we still have those to work on, and it'll take a long time, but nonetheless, they're very important. And then there's the whole larger global scene, the importance of immigration. I mean, is America really a place where people can feel welcome to come from all over the world? Because we need those people to come here. In science and engineering, we don't generate enough scientists and engineers from American-born boys and girls, whatever their background. We need to do a better job of that. And partly our problem in public education and just other things about our society and our value system.
It's been a really tough election year this past year, and our country is in many ways more divided than ever. And many in JSPG's networks and many early career researchers, I think it's fair to say, are left-leaning or left of center. You shared the sort of call for early career researchers to be sharing their ideas for how we can mend across aisles. What advice do you have for authors who are looking to develop science policy solutions that would appeal to a coalition of partners that they don't normally work with, whether it's Republicans or business groups or so forth?
Well, of course, absolutely right. We need that kind of two-way conversation, dialogue. I mean, reasonable people sitting down and even willing to agree to disagree. I wish I knew the right approach that would work for everybody. I don't have that kind of wisdom, but I could offer a few comments just from my own experience, because in my jobs at NSF and the White House, of course, I had to work with people I didn't agree with, even some I didn't like personally. But you have to put all that aside or you don't make any progress. So there's some things that personally I've come to think were important, at least in terms of my own ability to get anything done. First of all, to know as much as you can about the person or the people you're speaking with. The old adage, and know your audience, and try for a dialogue. You have to keep your overall objective of the discussion or the testimony or the conference or the speech, whatever. You always have to keep that in mind. But in order to get it across, there's several things you might try to do. Local examples are terrific. If you can connect your policy topic with something that you know people have on their minds or care about or important to the community or the profession or the group, whatever group you're talking about. I always found that was very useful to sort of get people to calm down and actually have a conversation. I always try to start a conversation with something that I think we might agree on. You know, we all care about family, friends, children, sports, the weather. Try to invite the other person to talk first. You know, tell me a little bit about yourself, or you know, how'd you get into this business, or whatever. People, by and large, like to talk about themselves. And once they start talking about themselves, you're kind of with them. I mean, you've come along, and then sometimes they realize they've been talking too much, and they'll then be open, much more open, to hearing from you. So, you know, once you've heard them out, say climate change, it's a hoax, or it isn't bad, or we need more carbon, or whatever it is, rather than saying, no, you are wrong, and let me tell you why you're wrong. I mean, that just doesn't work. Another approach is, I get what you're saying. Let me tell you, let me share with you what I think, and just the reason that I feel this way. And then there'll be a back and forth. You can actually sometimes have a conversation. One should try to moderate the discussion somehow. Humor, I think, humility, a little humility and humor, so long as it's not obviously false, is, I think, undervalued. I used it in the White House carefully because, you know, time constraints and things going on in the White House, but it often works if it really is genuinely self-effacing, I think. With Congress, you have to be a little bit careful with the humor because the senators really want to make the jokes and get the laughs. They're not interested in the witnesses making the jokes and getting the laughs. So if you're going to use humor there, it needs to be humor that really reflects positively on whoever it is sitting at the table. About speaking and writing, I learned a long time ago that less is often more. You know, when in doubt, throw it out, the old saying. I have a hard time with that. It's easy for me to write long. It's tough for me to write short. So often what I do is I write longer, and then I am brutal and I indent a chunk of it in blue with the thought I'm going to throw it out, but I'm not quite ready to throw it out. Anyway, everybody has their own style.
Absolutely. Those are great tips and really aligned with JSPG because, you know, we are sort of pracademic. We're in between academia and then the world of policy and practice. So, and then, you know, to sort of span out a bit, Neal, you know, looking back at your career, you've been able to hold so many, you know, illustrious positions. You know, many of our authors are at the start of their careers, or they're wanting to have impact, they're wanting to have a meaningful contribution. What's a piece of advice that you got when you were first starting out that you might share with others who are now looking to build their own careers in wanting to be effective in science policy?
A couple of things come to mind. One is I do remember when President Clinton asked me to leave the National Science Foundation after 5 years. Either he liked what I was doing or he didn't. But anyway, he asked me to come to the White House as science advisor in 1998. And so I had lunch with a friend, a man named William Golden, or Bill Golden, a wealthy investor and philanthropist who really loved science and did so much for science through his philanthropy, and who actually worked for a while in the White House back in the Truman days, I think, and wrote a memo. Was one of his jobs was, he was very young in the military at that time, wrote a little memo about what science advice should look like in the White House. It was a very, very important contribution. And so I kept up with Bill Golden over the years, and so knowing he worked in the White House and just he was a very wise man, I just said, you know, how do you work in the White House, Bill? And he said, well, Neal, when you were a little boy, he's always talking about when you're a little boy. Of course, Bill Golden sadly died a number of years ago at an old age. He said, Neal, when you were a little bit of boy, you remember looking through the microscope at a slide that had an amoeba on it and an ink blot. And you watched the amoeba crawl along, and when he got to the ink blot and touched it, he pulled back. And then the amoeba would crawl in a little bit different direction, bump into the ink and pull back, and then a little bit different, pull back. And so just keep doing that until the amoeba got around the ink blot. Bill said, that's how you work in the White House. So always remember that.
Great kernels of wisdom in so many of those. So to close out, Neal, our early career researchers or audience, they're going to be looking for resources, recommended readings, books, text. Are there any resources you'd recommend that our authors look into as they prepare their submissions?
So one thing I would urge your students and early career scientists to do is to read a number of articles, because my sense is the JSPG standards are really quite high. And so you can learn a lot by what's passed muster in the past. And I can mention a few things that I'm writing or have written with co-authors, of course. Things mainly to try to influence policymakers. And so if the students are interested in seeing any of these, one of them is a report called The Perils of Complacency, America at a Tipping Point in Science and Engineering. And this is a joint report coming out from the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, a place you know well, and the Baker Institute, Rice University's Baker Institute for Public Policy. It's really an update of an earlier report that the Academy put out. It was released at the end of September, and you can find an executive summary and the full report. You can find the links online. You can just Google them, actually, Perils of Complacency, and it will come up. Recently, turning more to like this week or earlier last week, Norm Augustine and I, Norm Augustine co-chaired the study committee of the earlier report I talked about. Many will know Norm, but not necessarily the younger audience. He was CEO and chairman of Lockheed Martin for many years, and he's done extraordinary pro bono work for the science community, the National Academy's report, the famous Gathering Storm report of 2005 and 10, something like that. Anyway, Norm and I wrote an op-ed that appeared, I don't know, yesterday, I think, anyway, very recently, in this congressional news outlet called The Hill. And that piece is called, titled, the editors gave it a title, Chinese Innovation is Surging. We must fund science to compete.
Thanks so much for that. Dr. Neal Lane is a senior fellow at the Baker Institute for Public Policy and a member of the JSPG Advisory Board. Thanks again so much for joining us, Neal. Very much appreciated.
Thank you for having me, Shalin.
On behalf of JSPG and AAAS, we thank you for tuning into our video. Vannevar Bush's Endless Frontier framework was written in an entirely different era and society than which we find ourselves in. American science is exceptional and special, but there are many ways that we can improve upon and strengthen U.S. science policy for the betterment of the nation and the world.
We hope this short film has been informative and inspiring, and we invite all students, postdocs, policy fellows, early career researchers, and young professionals to submit for our joint call for papers focused on shaping the future of U.S. science policy. For more senior leaders, please share our call for papers through your networks and consider co-authoring a piece with your junior colleagues.
The deadline to submit for JSPG and AAAS's joint call for papers is April 4th, 2021. We look forward to learning from you and hearing your ideas through the call for papers and on Twitter. Thank you for tuning in and enjoy the AAAS annual meeting.